Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Intuitive Angling, and really appreciate you guys checking today's video out and spending some time with me. Guys, we're going to be talking about finesse swimbait fishing in the fall and the winter time in today's video. I've got some rigging techniques I want to show you here, different type of swim baits. I've got some modifications, and going to start talk a little bit about, the conditions you need to fish it in, and just give you sort of an overall seminar here for this finesse swim bait deal that really we're getting ready to get into the middle of right now. Also, guys, before we get started, just a quick reminder, anyone interested in booking an on-the-water lesson with me, you can do that by going to my Facebook page, Randy Blaukat Professional Angler, and just shoot me a private message. I'll give you all the details for that, so I really appreciate it. Okay, guys, these little swim baits, man, they are probably responsible for catching as many bass over the past 5 years in bass fishing as any lure out there. They're really good for a diversity of species of bass. They work in a wide range of conditions. They work all over the country. You can use them on deep, you can use them shallow, you can use them suspended. They just get a lot of bites. It's sort of a modification of the grub that's been around forever, but the more high tech, technology that came with the realistic designs is what's really gave them the ability to go far above what they ever were before. So let's get into some of my favorite ways to rig them and some of my favorite baits. Now, first of all, there's only two ways that I rig these things. Number one is with the core tackle hover rig hook there, and number two, Megabass Okashira jig head. I use both of these. On the core tackle hover rig, guys, I usually like to use this on my baits or when my swim baits when I'm trying to get them deeper to the bottom, because the core tackle hover rig, it tends to make the lure spiral down. It gives it a lot more natural fall. So if I'm trying to keep it close to the bottom, I'm using the hover rig and I'm using the Okashira head if I'm keeping it higher up in the water column, more for suspended fish. So I'll show you how to rig both of them. Then I'll show you a couple of different modifications and we'll get into talking a little bit. First of all, the Okashira head, guys, it's nice and simple. Well, first of all, I'll show you a couple of the baits I use. Also, guys, the baits that I'm talking about, I'll have all these swim baits and the Okashira heads and the core tackle hover rig in my tackle warehouse link in the description of this video, so you guys can go straight to that link if you want to order some. But my favorites, guys, are the 3-inch Megabass Spark Shad, the 3-inch Megabass Hazendong Shad, and the 2.4-inch Keitech here. These are the three that I use 99% of the time. I've very seldom found a time when these won't work. If I'm fishing it closer to the bottom, I really like this Hazendong Shad on the core tackle hover rig head, and I'll rig it up here in a second. If I'm fishing it, strictly for suspended bass, where I'm reeling it down 5 or 10 feet under the water, it's usually either the Spark Shad or the Keitech. If it's a low light condition and the water visibility is a little bit color to it, I usually go to the Spark Shad because it's a little beefier profile. But in the real clear water situations, I'll go to the Keitech 2.4. So it's pretty simple right off the bat, with the Okashira head here. And I do use, this is the 1/8 ounce Okashira head. This is the one I use all the time. Really simple, just come straight in. And when you're rigging these guys on the Okashira head, you really have to take your time to make sure you go perfectly straight through the center of the swim bait. Because if you don't, if you're off even the slightest degree, it's going to cause that swim bait to roll a little bit. So make sure it's dead nuts in the center of that swim bait, and it's going to run super straight like that. So that's the setup with the Okashira right there. And sometimes I'll pull the eyes off of it. I don't know if it makes much difference, but you got 4 eyes like that. And I'll go ahead and take the eyes off, and I'll show you what it looks like, without the eyes. Sometimes, without the eyes, maybe look a little bit more natural to you, but it's one way to rig it. And then the Keitech is the same way here. It's come in like this. Keitech actually has a sort of a slot where you can line up with a little bit better. That's the Keitech setup there. And then with the hover rig, and I do usually use the hover rig, on the Hazendong Shad. If you've never rigged this hover rig hook, guys, come in just behind, about 1/8 of an inch behind the top of it, thread it through, all the way to the hook there. And then when you pull it through the bait to where the eye is coming out, and see the little point there, you just stick it right back into the head of the bait where it comes up there. So therefore, it's going to look like this when it's done rigging like that. It's just going to come through. You got to straighten it up like that a little bit. But this is the hover rig setup like that. But like I said, probably 75% of the time I use the Okashira, and the other time with the Hasm Dog. Now, a couple different modifications I'm going to show you guys here. It all comes with some chartreuse dye. Now, take a look at this, sort of before and after. One of the things I always do with this is I start out with some chartreuse marking pen. I'll put just a little puff on the tail on both sides, not very much. You don't want to put very much on it, just a little bit. And I usually always go along the center line, and I'll put just a little bit of chartreuse down that center line. And go both sides of them. There's something about this, even in clear water situation, I still do this. It just adds a little something to the bait. It just adds a little bit of that chartreuse next to the clear on there, makes it work really good. And then on the Megabass one, I'll do the same thing. Rig it on there. I probably use dye 95% of the time on my swim baits. Same type of thing, little chartreuse puff there, right down the line. Gives it a nice little chartreuse look. It really creates a nice little accent there. It stands out in the water pretty good. Okay, so that's the rigging and how to modify it a little bit. Now, the areas that you want to fish on this in the fall and the winter time, for me, you can't go wrong with points. I mean, points are probably the #1 structure to fish a small swim bait on. Very easy to do. Just get on some type of a main lake or secondary point. Based upon the water clarity and the sky conditions is how deep you want to fish it. Obviously, the cleaner the water, the deeper you're going to fish that swim bait. Normally, if you do have some type of low light conditions, like if it's windy or cloudy, I tend to want to fish it a little bit shallower, and I want to fish it higher up in the water column. So say, for example, if we get out there in November and the water temperature's 58 degrees and the wind's blowing 10 miles an hour and it's cloudy, I'd probably get my boat, out in, 15, 20 foot of water, cast it to the bank, and as soon as it hit the bank, I just start slowly reeling it in. Try to keep it about, 5 to 8 foot underneath the surface all the way back. If it's a little bit brighter day, move out deeper on that point. I put the Hasm shad with the core tackle hover rig on it, cast it out into sort of that 15 to 20 foot zone, let it go to the bottom, and just sort of slowly work it back, maybe hop it a little bit like a jig, trying to keep it close to the bottom. And another thing that works pretty good that I found out is you can take a little bit larger one, like a 3-inch Keitech like this, put it on the Okashira head, and if you have water visibilities that are like over 3 feet, water temperature is close to 60 degrees, you can actually buzz these things like a spinner bait. Get up there on those windy points, throw them right to the bank, keep your rod tip high, and just keep the bait in sight all the time, almost like a swim jig. And those fish will come out and hammer this thing in the month of November, burning it, especially if, like I said, if that water is upper 50s or a little bit higher. It's going to be really, really effective with that. Other type of structures that work really good on it is you can cast them around bridge piers and catch fish, around wave breaks, on the ends of commercial docks, or some type of floating residential docks over deeper water. And all you guys that fish blueback herring lakes, like if you fish Lake Hartwell, Lake Lanier, Lake Murray, one of the best ways to catch them this time of year on a little swim bait is to get in the middle of the coves, like go back in a main lake or a creek cove, get about 2/3 of the way back in there, and just start casting straight down the middle of the cove. Let the bait go about halfway down to the bottom and start reeling it in. And a lot of those lakes that have heavy spotted bass populations, those fish will suspend in the middle of those guts, and a little bitty finesse swim bait is a really good way to catch them. But pretty easy to do. If you just rig it up like I told you, normally use it on 6-pound test Seaguar Vizex line, Megabass whipstake spinning rod. I don't like to use 8. The reason I don't like 8 is your casting distance is reduced and there's a little bit too much drag. I find out that I get more bites and I get better feel on it with 6-pound test. Just put it on there, get out there, fan cast around those points, and that's probably the easiest way for you to catch one. But and for you guys that like to spotlight for bass, obviously this is one of the top techniques. It's a really good bait that people use with live scope, although you guys know I'll never do that. So anyway, if you just want to get lots of bites, this is probably the #1 way to do it. It's a really good way to catch them. And if I could leave you with one final thing, guys, on this, take that little tip that I gave you about burning a swim bait shallow. No one hardly does this. And I'll give you a prime example. If you're catching if you're fishing a lake that has some clean water, like over 3 feet, and you've been catching fish like on a buzz bait or spook or whopper plopper, or maybe burning a spinner bait shallow on that water, you put you on a 3 or 4 inch swim bait with an 1/8 ounce head and start burning and buzzing that swim bait just under the surface and see what happens. It catches the same fish, and it's a lot more subtle presentation that they've never seen. And I have whacked them on that in November doing that. So anyway, hope it helps you guys catch a few. We'll talk later.